Greetings and welcome. My name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you and welcome. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, licensed presenters, the core new core, my patrons. I need more patrons, please. Your patrons make it possible for me to make these broadcasts. Go to patreon.com, Patreon, and $1 is fine. $10 is good if you're really studying Pilates and learning about it from me. Equate the value that you're getting with the value of your patronage, if you can, please. And finally, this broadcast is meant for anybody interested in surviving and thriving as a Pilates instructor. So yesterday was my attempt to practice a presentation that I made an offer for, 20 minutes, $20 for 40 minutes. And I started seeing that maybe 40 minutes is a long time. And then I started realizing how disjointed my presentation was, and how much more there is to do than just cover the 5 things from Joe. So I set out and made an outline that I'm working on still. But in terms of what I would take my teaching aids, like my books and my toys, and then disclaimers in a way, okay? I'm very passionate about what I have to share. But the presentation is just meant to share it without being attached to whether or not you appreciate it or not, or get it or not. Right? So, in my presentation, in my thinking process, I often lose my train of thought, and then because consciousness percolates, I think, the train of thought picks back up after it circles around. So bear with me on my lack of continuity. And then everyone constructs their own point of view. And I'm constructing mine and trying to help you construct yours. So in the beginning, right, start timer. Now, okay, it's 11:09. I have another phone somewhere with a timer on it, but so start timer. So if this is a 20-minute, and say it's going to be 11:10, so 20 minutes would be at 11:30. So under the presumption that I've already started, and I'm doing a 20-minute presentation for $10, and I got paid the $10. So in the beginning, I'd say I'm here to explain CT and MMP, and in the explanation, it's important to make a distinction in terms of the type of knowledge that I'm presenting. Okay? There's knowledge based on folklore, and there's knowledge based on theory, and especially in the Pilates world, it's important to appreciate the difference between knowledge that is based in folklore versus knowledge that is based in an explanation or theory. So it's folklore and theory, and folklore is word of mouth knowledge, and theory is an explanation of knowledge. And so the world of Pilates is a world of knowledge based in folklore. There is no explanation of what Pilates is for what it is within the realm of folklore, because, and all of Pilates for the most part is folklore based on who you know that knows somebody, who you know that knew somebody that knew somebody that knew Joe. And if you knew Joe, I'm happy for you. And all that you pass on is your word of mouth knowledge from your time with Joe. And then everyone else that passes on that knowledge, it's still knowledge based in folklore. And CT is meant to be, is presumably knowledge based in an explanation. So on my list I have here talking about direction in terms of talking about Pilates. And when you talk about Pilates, what direction are you going in when it comes to Pilates? And because MMP is a point of view of Pilates based on a theory that Pilates has an essence of its own, and that essence is the ideal that you reach for when doing Pilates. So Pilates goes in the direction towards uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement. That's the definition of MMP. Pilates goes towards complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. And within the MMP point of view, that's a state of being in the body in the moment of the doing. And again, within the MMP point of view, you're looking for that state of being in the performance of the mat. And by that, the mat is the method. The mat, doing the mat is doing Pilates. Now, on the whole end of the spectrum where people aren't even able to do one Pilates exercise, okay, that's the other direction of taking what you know about Pilates and the ideals that you're in the pursuit of and using those to help a person with their issues. And that to me is the realm of physical therapy. It's issue-oriented. And as much as Pilates gets turned around and dragged toward addressing issues in the human being, fundamentally, Pilates is about the human being aspiring towards the performance of Pilates. It's a discipline, it's a routine, and you do the routine to be prepared for whatever comes up. And so there's this direction of Pilates, and whereas I think of physical therapy headed in the direction toward the issues of the individual, in Pilates, within MMP, Pilates, the direction of Pilates is toward the ideal of what Pilates is meant to be. Both in the state of being in which you do it, and what you do, and how it looks, meaning how controlled it is. So, and maybe that's what we're talking about, actually, disclaimers and the carousel. What's the difference between a carousel and a merry-go-round? When you're standing outside of them, looking at them, a carousel moves from left to right, and a merry-go-round moves from right to left. I try to use the word carousel to reinforce the accuracy of moving from left to right. And so that's my left to right. And And I know from experience when addressing a group of people that are all like eagles trying to capture the prey that they're after, the understanding of the information that's going by, like the carousel that's going by. If you let them know that what's going by repeats, and it'll be more than once and more than twice, you can visibly see everybody in the room relax a little bit out of the fear of missing something, because they know they're going to have more than one chance to capture it. And so in my offer in this presentation, seeking to explain CT and MMP, remember my intention to stand with you as the carousel goes by, because what there is to learn, what's on the carousel is there to learn. It's just that it goes by and then fades out of sight, which is the nature of life and also the nature of learning, in that you expose yourself to it and then you set it down. And then it comes back again, and it's this spaced repetition of exposure that is the most effective way to learn something. And like, learn what? The target. What is the target? What is the target? The target is control. Why is control the target? Because Joseph Pilates named his book Return to Life Through Contrology, and he defined his method as contrology is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. I like this idea of having an outline to help make the most of these different passes of the carousel as they go by, right? And so pass one is welcoming everybody to the presentation, and the presentation is meant to explain CT and MMP, right? That's the first pass. Now, the second pass and the third pass are right on your sheet that is your offer sheet to make a presentation. So you offer to explain CT and MMP. You give a price, $10 for an amount of time, 20 minutes, and collect in advance. So assuming I've collected and established the style of presentation being a carousel exposure, and actually perhaps before that establishing the target of control, that all of this is about control, because Joe named his method contrology, and my interest is in giving you the control of this knowledge. So in pass 2, meaning the second layer of information about CT and MMP, I think it matters that you explain CT and MMP in general terms, meaning that CT is about biomechanics and MMP is one point of view of Pilates. Two mountains of information on different subjects. And then pass 3, that's also part of the explanation that goes beyond just willing to explain some initials. Pass 3 is that in terms of here's CT and MMP, the next layer of understanding that or teaching that or explaining that is that CT is about biomechanics and MMP is a point of view of Pilates. And then the layer beneath that is that CT refers to core new tension and MMP refers to Michael Miller Pilates. Now, based on that much information, that's as much information as you get for free. If you want information, then pay for a presentation. And if you don't want it enough to pay for the presentation, then I don't need to make it. And I consider it a value, and it's how I try to make my living. So thank you for entertaining the idea of attending the presentation or listening to it or hearing it. But if you're not interested enough to pay for it, I'm not interested enough in going further in the explanation. Okay? So, now you've paid for the explanation, maybe already, of course, in advance. And my next layer of 1, 2, 3, and 4, the next layer about CT and MMP that matters the most to me is that you can feel both of them. You can feel them both. Core new tension is something that you can feel. And Pilates is something that you can feel. Core new tension I think of as a sensation, and Pilates, I'm always referring to Michael Miller Pilates in the course of this presentation. In MMP, Pilates is an experience, something you can experience. And so in making the presentation, I'm just offering you the knowledge. And I'm saying that there's a sensation attached to both of them. And you may get what I'm saying intellectually out from the mind, all that thinking. But when it really sinks in and when you really have control of it is when you have a sensation that you can associate with both CT and MMP. Now, in the next pass, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, the next pass has to do with the limitations of CT and MMP, this point of view. This point of view deals with physics and biology, and only considers physics and biology within the context of its point of view. That's because there's a lot of Pilates out there that has nothing to do with, or very little to do with, biology or physics, or makes any consideration at all of science. And in MMP, it's about the biology accomplishing the physics. And in MMP, it's about the nature of physics when you get to the quantum level and look at observing. More on that later. So I'm on pass 5 now, and I've tried to establish the framework that CT and MMP works within, and it's a scientific one, knowing that spirituality and mysticism and all kinds of, and just non-science, just tradition, things, the world out there can look at things in a lot of different ways other than through the eyes of science, specifically biology and physics. And most of Pilates only considers biology. Without regard to the physics in which it's happening, and without regard to the physics that the biology is occurring in, it's really tough to get to a comprehension of the mat and its structure of, grammatically speaking, how it facilitates you to speak the language of Pilates based on the grammar that's in the original mat work. So it's like I have 10 and 4, 10 and 3, 13 minutes left out of this 20-minute procession. So to understand Michael Miller Pilates, it really helps to understand core nutension first. And to understand either of them, it's important as well, actually, no, not with core nutension. Core nutention is just a willingness to recognize and acknowledge how the body engages itself to move through space. That the body has rotational dynamics within it. And it's the interaction between those rotational dynamics that facilitates the body moving through space. And so, to explain CT and MMP, I cover five points. 3 of them from Joe, right out of his book. Michael Miller Pilates comes direct to you from Joe in his book and delivers an experience. So whatever else you learn and supplement your knowledge of Pilates, the view of MMP is one that gives you a view of what it is just out of Joe's book that claims it's an experience that you're after. Now, the theory relies on the evidence or the facts of Joe's definition, Joe's statement, and Joe's sequence. So here I would hope that in this presentation that I envisioned yesterday, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around, a group of people that have 2 businesses, a Pilates studio and a physical therapy studio. So in explaining CT and MMP, these 5 points, there's 3 from Joe and 2 from me. And so that's like a pass right there, because I informed you that to explain CT and MMP, I would take 3 things out of Joe's book to then define core nutension and define Pilates. Maybe just define MMP, because Pilates will always have a lot of definitions to it. So then another pass on the merry-go-round would say, okay, of these 5 things, 3 from Joe and 2 from me. The first thing from Joe is a definition, the second thing from Joe is a statement, and the third thing from Joe is a sequence. The 2 things from me are definitions, one of core nutension and the other of Michael Miller Pilates. The core nutention is about biomechanics. In a way, it's beyond Pilates. It has to do with how the body engages itself to move through space. It's about the body utilizing oppositional rotation between axes. And that's the definition of core nutension. Oppositional rotation between axes. The definition of core nutension, oh, see, I'm out of 20 minutes, I guess. That was quick. The definition of core nutension is uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement. It's a long definition. It's as short as I can make it, and it comes from these three things in Joe's book: his definition, his statement, and his sequence. And that was like pass 8 in terms of actually giving the information of those 5 things. Except I didn't. So in Joe's definition, contrology develops the body uniformly. In Joe's statement, right, next paragraph, contrology develops the body uniformly. Then hundreds, roll up, roll over, leg circles, ... to push-ups. The sequence. Those 3 things get you to uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement. And the second thing is a bonus. It's an understanding of biomechanics that doesn't exist in the world of biology and biodynamics, or whatever you want to call it. So core new tension is about how the body is built and how the body uses itself to move through space. And Michael Miller-Pilates' definition tries to come to an understanding of what Pilates is based on the 3 things in Joe's book. So now I'm out of phases, but there's obviously more phases to come in this. If we go back to the idea of knowledge and what's common knowledge, and here is this vast ocean of humanity, and whatever it knows as common knowledge is common to everyone, okay? And in the Pilates world, this represents the common knowledge of tradition and contemporary and colloquial and all of what is part of the aristocratic point of view of Pilates that's based in what? That's based in folklore. To get a handle on CT, so I want to take you from here to an understanding of core new tension and then an understanding of Michael Miller-Pilates. But to even get to core new tension, we have to start here at the hips and recognize that the human individual, the human being, has a rotational dynamic at the hips. Okay? Not just an image. Literally, physically, the biology is capable of creating rotation here. And in the creation of the rotation, creates an axis around which that rotation is occurring, and the end point of that axis, or the end of that axis, is an end point of the axis. So to get to an understanding of CT, you have to go out of what's common and just at least listen to the notion that it's a fact that the hips rotate that the hips rotate. Seems like an obvious thing. But then when you look at the hips rotating, you also can see rotation at the shoulders and the ears, the knees, the ankles, and the metatarsals. And it's me sharing with you the knowledge that those rotations interact with one another, and when you get opposite rotation between axes, you get what I call core new tension. So that's where that all comes from. But the recognition of core new tension requires that you see that or recognize that the core isn't just an image, and the core isn't some vague abstract thing. The core is a condition, not a location, because it's the condition of grip that defines the location. When the body has rotational capability, it can make rotation. That's like battery power. But when you take battery power from two different places and connect them up, so there's batteries inside of here, batteries. But when you put that battery power between two different places, you create some kind of tension between them, and what results out of that is more muscular engagement. You get more of your musculature involved. And I'm here to share with you that core new tension is just a fact of the matter, and it's how the body engages itself to move through space. And in so engaging itself in oppositional rotation between axes, it gives you the uniform engagement that you're looking for in order to develop your body uniformly. So the path to uniform engagement is through core new tension. Like it or not, it's a fact of the matter, and it's just a matter of whether or not you're willing to consider it as such at all, at least to the point where you're willing to start looking for it in your own body. And then when you actually find the sensation of core new tension in your own body, it's much easier to be a believer in that kind of knowledge because you have first-hand experience with it. So core new tension is biomechanical. That's my word, just referring to the biology, accomplishing the physics. And what you get out of core new tension is more uniform usage. This is my symbol for like the light, right? But you get more uniform usage, and you also get a sensation of alignment between the points creating the tension. So now it seems that the next thing to explain further is the MMP definition of Pilates. Well, the first word of the definition is uniform, and that's because the second thing in Joe's book that we quote is Contrology develops the body uniformly. And if you believe in that, core new tension is the way you get to it. Whether you believe it or not, the way the body uniformly engages itself is through core new tension. So we're talking about number 5, the definition. Eccentric means out, away from center. Joe's book talks about, controlling the center and moving out from there. This is the center. This is the core. But the core goes on to create other rotational dynamics. And where this curve changes direction, it's called an inflection point. And so you get a grip at the hips that is a moving in toward that center. And then when you engage in oppositional grips, you get elongation and eccentricity out from the inflection point. That's the second word in the definition of MMP. Loading, here's gravity, and we're talking about loading. Loading, and now that's 40. See, time flies, and there's a lot to cover. 40 minutes may barely be enough to make a presentation, but the point, I think, is to try to make your presentation fit within the amount of time you've got. So I'm still working on loading, and if you just go through the exercises, the sequence of exercises in Joe's book, right? If you just go through the sequence of exercises, you see the body taking on more weight, moving further away from center, and that's why loading is in the definition. It has to do with weight bearing. It has to do with gravity. Okay. Then the flowing through, the two middle words of the definition, refer to the fact that you're flowing from one exercise to the other without stopping. There's flow involved. Necessarily so. Flowing. And then progressive patterns of movement. Progressive is like going up a stairs. You get from one place to the other, and you get there in stages. So the loading is progressive, but also the patterns of movement are progressive, meaning flexion, extension, and side bending, and then rotating within the sequence of the mat. Oh, come on. Within the sequence of the mat, the exercises themselves honor this progression of controlling in flexion before controlling in extension, before controlling in side bending, before controlling in rotation. It's a progressive moving through patterns of movement. And by far and away, aspiring people that wanted to teach, I think, took that as the most valuable thing in terms of what do I teach next, in terms of recognizing what movement pattern they're teaching, and then do they want to stay in the same movement pattern? Do they want to regress for some reason, or do they want to progress for some reason? And knowing that the progression is from flexion to extension, and then side bending, and then rotation to torsion. And so MMP is just one point of view of Pilates between yours, mine, and everybody else's. But it's different in that it's based on a theory of Pilates that seeks to explain Pilates for what it is in and of itself, based on 3 things out of Joe's book that comes up with the definition of the ideal. The MMP definition of Pilates. To the extent that you know Joe's definition and you know the MMP definition, as others have already, you can offer clarity to those seeking to either drum up definition or to inject their definition on the world. You get to help a person see Pilates not just within the realm of folklore and word of mouth and the knowledge base of folklore based on what everybody says about it, to another kind of knowledge based in theory, seeking to explain essence. And as much as I haven't gone in as much depth and detail as I'd like to, I'm coming to a close in this presentation, so that's where it's like, okay, you realize you're out of time, or you have a last 5 minutes maybe thing of what you cover in the last 5 minutes. In the ending, okay, so my timer goes off. If I've done my conclusion right, before that timer goes off, I review that we've set out to share knowledge on CT and MMP. And I've constantly been trying to expand and deepen the level of your understanding of what CT and MMP are through spaced repetition, through pointing out information as it goes by. That there's a sensation to be sought and found in both of them. So I'm not just making an intellectual argument. I'm saying, hey, you can feel this. The knowledge you now have on CT and MMP, though unnerving as it might be, can prove to be, I think, enriching and rewarding in attaining what you're aiming for, control. Thank you for listening, and I hope that this might lead to more involvement with teaching or instructing, and if not, then at least you've armed yourself with knowledge that may serve you well, even though you don't see how it might happen now. I don't know about that, but we'll see. You never know when knowledge is going to come in handy, or background or experience. I'm in Paris, sitting in a meeting with a French film director of some repute, and the owner of the Pilates studio I was teaching at in Paris, and somebody else. And they had this whole thing, they were going to make a video on Pilates using fashion models. And of course I had my opinions about how well that might work. And the film director didn't give me the time of day until somewhere along the line it came out that I had a Jesuit education, at least for 4 years in high school, which might be the most impactful or deranging or whatever you might consider, but I had 4 years of the Jesuits, and he had a Jesuit background, and all of a sudden we were best friends. What you know is private knowledge. It's not common knowledge, but it's still knowledge, and a lot of times it's the private knowledge that allows you to make a distinction between who you are and everyone else, and between the quality of your work and everyone else's, and the time frame in which you achieve the results that you achieve. Get as much done as you can, because life can't live forever. Read between the lines and see behind the curtain. Evaluate points of view. Connect the dots. Right? Know how to make an offer. And then practice making an offer within a time frame. I'm finding out that it's hard to fit everything in. It's impossible to fit everything in a presentation. What matters in the presentation, I think, is the carousel going by, and that the familiarity is built during the course of the presentation to the extent that you can go. But if you don't make the offer, there's no chance of you making money just on the value of your knowledge. And believe me, the value of this knowledge transcends what's common in a big way, and so it can be considered threatening or whatever, but it won't be long until enough people actually recognize CT and MMP to where everybody has to consider that knowledge in constructing their simulation of who they are and what they're about as a Pilates instructor. It's up to you to direct your thinking. Geist.